Hello. As hyperlinks make the web what it is, I thought I should talk a little bit about how we've marked up and styled our anchor tags on this initial version of the show's website. The premise of the podcast is that we are relearning the fundamentals of web design. And what that is showing us is that this process is only partly about learning new approaches and specification. Much of it is about unlearning things that once seemed like cool design, but increasingly look more like ignorance and perhaps even contempt for web users. So let's start with the basic HTML. If you're using the VS Code editor, it couldn't be easier. You just type in A and then select the first option, and it takes the cursor to the place where you need to enter your URL. And if you're linking to an internal document, then you can just put / and then select what you like. And then if you tab, it takes you to where you want to put it in your copy that's going to be linked to. And ideally, we'd want to avoid vague terms like read more or click here. And that's because for accessibility, it can be confusing for screen readers if they are reading something like this, which is out of context with the rest of the body copy here. Of course, we can get around this by announcing to the screen reader via an aria-label. So I'll just bring that up here. And then we can enter the text that we want them to have. But I think these days, it's a lot easier to try where possible to design with non-sighted people in mind. I think that's because it will save you, and certainly I struggle with this, having to work out the difference between things like aria-label and aria-label by, which is all on context. And recently, I actually stumbled across this problem because I had to add in an aria-label to a read more link, which was on a WordPress blog archive page where it's listing all of the blog posts. And this is a really common pattern to see something like this, where it will list out the title of the post and maybe an excerpt, and then have a read more. But the title of the post is generally the link that you want. So all I was doing is programmatically adding to the read more the same title that was here, meaning that if we'd have just made that title very clearly a link and not removed the underlining, there really was no point in a read more. So it's made me think a lot more about those kind of things. Let's move on to the next option that we might want to use for an anchor tag, and that would be to use target blank. And this is a bit of a security risk, but built into this is the rel no opener and no referrer, which corrects this. Interestingly, and this was quite useful to me, is that there isn't an autocomplete for the other alternative here, which is no follow. As you can see, it didn't autocomplete. And this was useful because it made me question what I'd been doing, because I'd listened to a lot of earlier advice from SEOs on how you might be able to balance out your inbound and outbound links for better SEO results using no follow. And I'm sure ratios do matter, but of course, if you think about it, it's quite black hat. If everyone was to do this, then and prevent search engines from following everybody else, there would be little point in having search or SEO at all. So from now on, I'm only using nofollow to stop passing on authority to sites that don't reflect the value of the sites. Perhaps we're calling out something that we think is kind of bad behavior and need to refer to it. I think generally freely linking to reputable sources is probably going to help these days with Google's new focus on showing experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. Anyway, the big question, I think, is when do we use target blank and have that open in a user's tab? And I'm quite well aware of this debate that's been running for a long time. I remember reading this article on CSS tricks at the time in 2014 and actually changing my behavior, which was to default to treating external links as something different and opening up a new tab, and internal ones just keeping them as normal. And this cites this as being a bad reason. And I did amend it for a little while, but like one of the commenters on this post says, the client just sort of came back thinking it was a bug. And I would imagine since 2014, there's probably more people who are using social media on a daily basis when, if you do click on a link, then it does open up a new tab. But interestingly enough, for me, when I started just recently following people who talk about web standards, it's very rare for them to force you to open a new tab. And generally, I think this article is right, or at least that we probably need to think about it, because what it does, I don't think it's mentioned here, it does take away the user's ability to choose for themselves whether they want to open this in a new tab or not. Now, in our site, we are, because we come under one of the good reasons using target blank, and that is because we are a podcast with an audio player and video. So if we go to any of these and somebody clicks on a link, it could disturb their listening. So we've got one of the listed reasons for why it might be a good thing, and that's what I've done. And to keep some consistency, what I initially did was on a page like the resources page, I made those open up in a new tab. But thinking again about it, I've changed and I've removed that. So you have to open them with the new tab. I'm not entirely clear, but I think it's a good time to think about it, because it does. I mean, we have to assume that our users know that they can right click, but once you get into that practice, then it's nice to be able to have that choice. Anyway, it's one for debate, but I'm just letting you know that's kind of what we've done here. I have done, and this is taking advice from WebAIM, who are the people who create that great tool where you can check accessibility. One of their suggestions are with new windows opening is that you use one of these icons, which I actually have done on the site. It doesn't, as they acknowledge here, necessarily tell people that it's going to open up a new tab. It might just indicate to them that this is an external document that you're linking to. But I think it does give some indication that this link is different. So I've actually used that. If we go back to the home page here, we'll see that I'm using that here. And I'll just bring this up, but I will add it also to some show notes here. So if you want the code, let me go over to it. And I've got it here, but I've commented it out because I didn't want to distract while I was doing that. So let me just comment it back. And all we're doing here is with the anchor tags where the target is set to blank. After that element there, I'm adding in this URL to this linked out SVG, which we are seeing here. Okay, let me move on to, as we've moved into the CSS, I couldn't possibly get through this video without referencing a talk by Hayden Pickering, and particularly underline your effing links, you sociopaths. Hayden has a great way of really cutting through a lot of BS, and really this struck me as something that is quite a sensible thing to do. You'll find it as t-shirt slogans now. But without custom CSS, browser agent styles give us underline on our links by default. It's a signifier that identifies that this piece of UI is different to other things, and it helps us to navigate the web. Unfortunately, designers come along and remove them without fully understanding the impact, particularly on the 300 million estimated color blind people of the world. And I must say that I'm particularly guilty of this because I used a page builder that was based on Bootstrap 4, and I just went along with this really without thinking about it. And they remove the links unless the user hovers over them. So if you can't distinguish color, then you are completely lost and you have to just move your cursor around. This was changed in Bootstrap 5, so I guess they learned from that. And actually in Hayden's talk, he mentions an accessibility expert, a friend of his, Adrian Roselli, who was urging Mastodon to underline their links. And I think I've got it up somewhere over here. Yes. And there was a lot of resistance on that, not least by the SEO and lead developer of it, who wanted to keep the visual clutter down on it. And of course, it's open source, so there's lots of other subjective opinions. But as you can see now that they have committed to adding this so that you see underlines now. So I think that's probably the direction. But I do get the point here. There is a consideration. Aesthetics are important. They're perhaps not more important than making sure that someone knows how to use a UI, but they are still important. And Fortunately, CSS has given us even more control over our underlines. And if I just go over to the MDN records here, we'll see we've got a lot of choices on these anyway with the text decoration property. We can change the color of our underlines if we want. We can change the style, of course. And more recently, we can change the thickness, which I think is really handy. And this, combined with the new ability also to offset that underline, which is great because we'll see here that there are other ones to have the decorations skip ink, which really means that it leaves a bit of a space on the underline for your descenders on your text. So we can control that. But if we combine the thickness with this, and that's what I've done on our site, and I'll credit the person who has kind of helped me with doing this. I'm using it now as a reset. So it's Stephanie Eccles. She's a great writer on modern CSS. And she, in a recent article there, has been adding this as a way of just making this part of all sites. So she puts in the thickness, in fact, in a function. So there's a minimum and a maximum that you can go to, and then an underline offset. She's doing it with M's on, if I bring up the code editor and go up to where I've added mine, I actually decided to change that to rems. So with rems, it's relative to the root. With M's in hers, it's going to be relative to the element. And as we've got on the learn here, some header 2s that are quite thick, if I put that to M's, they, to my eye, seem a little bit thick. They just seemed a bit too much on that. So that's what I've gone with. But now that's going to be a modern reset, because what it's doing here is it's saying any anchor tag that doesn't have a class, then apply this. And probably at some point I will take this off the menus on a redesign of that, because I think people understand that without any underlining, but I've left it there. There's just one other little thing that I quite like to do on this, and it's a sort of standard that I'm adding, is to give this a bit of a sense that something is happening, that you're pressing down. There's a little bit of give on this. So I put a position relative on my active state, and this is basically just moving it top, but it's using the new internationalized way of doing that by using inset block start, which I talked about before, rather than using top, which gives us more flexibility in the future. And I think that's probably all that I can get in on this video. I'm trying to keep them as short as possible. There is more to talk about with links, color contrast, visited links, but I think I'll do one more video, because I wanted also to mention that I've just added those in for accessibility, some skip links. Let's see if we can just bring that up. Should be here. There we are. Skip link over there. And I also want to mention something about new CSS options that we have also for our focus states. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.